Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and today's guest is deeply committed to reviving authentically Catholic devotional works for the laity. Joining us this morning is Brad Fossier, the owner of Jesu Press, a Catholic publisher dedicated to bringing timeless spiritual treasures from the saints back to modern readers. Good morning and welcome to the show, Brad.
Good morning, Keith. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here and joining us. Now, for those listeners out there that might not be familiar, could you maybe share with our listeners the inspiration behind founding Jesu Press and what led you to focus on reviving some of these faithful devotional works?
Absolutely, yeah. My day job, I'm a family physician, and I found myself looking for good traditional Catholic spiritual reading, and we're kind of in this phase now where a lot of stuff is really on these online archives and whatnot, and I'd find myself finding a book online that's in like a PDF format and constantly like referring to it on my computer, pulling it up, and realizing, man, I wish I just had a paper copy of these books. So I kind of challenged myself. I could revamp these books, reformat them, type them out somehow, and get a paper copy just so I could like hold on to it. You can find lots of these like facsimile copies online that aren't very high quality. So I was like, I wonder if I can just make a personal copy. So I did that for a couple of books and got okay at it, to where they were sitting around the house and friends would come over from our parish and be like, wow, where'd you get this cool book? Like this looks great. So I decided to just open a small business just out of our family's kind of warehouse in our backyard at the time, and decided to do a couple more titles, get a little catalog going, and really just commit to really solid devotional reading that has just clear Catholic teaching in it. So that's how it took off, and we formed Jesu Press just out of our backyard.
One thing I really do like, by the way, the fact that you mentioned that, obviously a lot of these things are online. There's something different about holding the actual book as opposed to just like scrolling on a phone or even on a tablet. So having that physically there also is less uncomfortable in, say, like adoration when you're on. It looks like you're on your phone.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm reading a devotional, guys. I'm not on my phone.
It's okay. Yeah, I like being able to highlight, underline, make little brackets in the margins too. There's something about just that tangible book. We try to kind of put nice artwork on the covers of ours too, so it's something that kind of brings you back to the book. It has good stuff on the inside and on the outside.
Yeah, and speaking of the outside, I've noticed a lot of the covers are really beautifully well done. Are you the mastermind behind the design?
It's all right here. Yeah, I have like a catalog of a lot of old kind of vintage books, and I kind of model a lot of our covers out off of those and draw out a lot of the covers by hand.
Incredible. Are there a lot of writings out there from saints that have just completely disappeared? How do you search for these?
Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff, especially from the 1800s. There was a lot of French theologians that were really writing specifically devotional works for the laity. A lot of those have kind of gone out of print. You can find most of the doctors of the church writings, but a lot of times, like St. Alphonsus has volumes and volumes of these works. So we try to, a lot of the times, find little snippets from these bigger volumes and say, that would make a really good kind of armchair reader for a Catholic layperson. So we did that with St. Alphonsus's Meditations on the Passion of Christ, and just made it into like a little 180-page meditation book, which was originally part of a 950-page volume. Just kind of reiterating these things in a kind of a readable form, so people don't feel like they're like blowing the dust off this huge textbook to open up the doctors of the church.
A little bit more of a light reading than, say, like diving deep into something like the Summa there.
Absolutely, which I feel like that format is a lot better for spiritual reading, which is to kind of lead itself into prayer a little more. You're not kind of sitting down to study or to really like fly through a bunch of pages, but take more of a meditative, devotional approach to your reading of just kind of simple, pious works that kind of inflame our love for the Lord and lead us back into prayer. St. Alphonsus used to say, if you want to train people for prayer, give somebody a pious book and just let them pause from time to time on little phrases that catch them, and sure enough, the Lord will lead people to kind of learn how to pray just from that pious reading sometimes. So I see it as kind of a stepping stone to get people into kind of devout mental prayer and meditative reading. So
It's
it
really,
can be
really
a good
nice.
stepping stone for that.
Yeah. So, why do you believe these works are essential for today's Catholic readers?
That's a great question. There's so much distraction in today's world. It's easy to pull up your computer screen and start scrolling through your Twitter feed, and you're filling your mind with things that are going to come back to you when you try to recollect yourself to the indwelling Trinity or try to concentrate when you're in prayer. Oftentimes, that Twitter feed comes back scrolling through your mind again. So, devotional reading really gives oil for the lamp that can burn in prayer. If you eat a nice meal, so spiritual reading is a lot like good food. You sit down and eat some good food in the morning, you'll be able to digest that throughout the rest of the morning and kind of revisit it at times so that instead of, I have a moment, a pause in my workday. Usually I might pull up my Twitter feed, but now I've kind of filled my head with good thoughts that I can go back to and digest throughout the day and really just fill in those small gaps with things that are helpful for the spiritual life, help us grow, help us progress spiritually. There's so much noise, it can really eliminate distractions by having something to focus on. Take some old devotion or an old spiritual practice and kind of breathe new life in it. I've been working on this virtue, but now I've read about this virtue this morning in my spiritual reading, and I really see the benefits of that virtue and how necessary it is to avoid the vice that's associated with that virtue. So just gives you a little more food for thought for your day.
I loved how you compared that spiritual reading to a really nice and hearty breakfast with like eggs and bacon. And
Yeah,
whereas if you're pulling up Twitter, the first thing you do, and it's like eating like a few bowls of Fruit Loops, like, yeah,
yeah.
sure, it tastes good, but then you feel awful afterwards and you just don't feel edified enough to really start your day. Oh, it's so
Right.
true.
If you don't get that solid food, you're gonna snack on junk food throughout the day.
Exactly. It's just an endless cycle then. Wow. Are
Absolutely.
there any specific works from saints that you recommend as maybe like a starting point for those that are maybe new to devotional literature?
Sure. I mean, some of the common starting points would be like the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, the Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. It's kind of hard when you don't know where people are at in their spirituality, so a beginner would obviously benefit from different books than someone that's more advanced in the life of prayer. So, for instance, you don't want to sit down as a beginner and open up a big book of like really intense mystical experiences from saints having visions and elevating in prayer when you're just trying not to gossip at your workplace or just starting out, getting your foot in the door. So yeah, I think in general a good across the board recommendation is try to have less spectacular books, some that aren't really like profound learning that you're going to have to really rack your brain over to dive into deep theology, but just simple books with kind of sentiments of piety in them that really refocus you on a virtue or the lives of the saints or just spiritual maxims that can be taken in small chunks. Those tend to be kind of good spiritual reading across the board.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that you are a family physician, and do you ever find these two almost like opposite realms combine at all at any points?
Obviously, as a physician, I'm interacting with people that are sometimes in tough situations. So, like I said, having good spiritual reading that I definitely wake up early before my kids get up and try to have mental prayer and get into some spiritual reading. And a lot of times that has given me the tools I need for the day to interact with people in the world and sometimes people that are in, bad situations, just having something that I've kind of fed myself with so that my conversations don't end up being shallow or empty. It kind of bolsters those conversations, I would say.
So cool. I never thought about that. That's a great way. I think all doctors, well, Catholic doctors should get into some spiritual reading. So that way they can implement it. And that way, yeah, that's a call out to my
I'll
doctor.
take it one more.
Anyway,
Let's just say all Catholics should pick up some spiritual reading.
very true. What is your, this is going to be tough, I'm sure. What is your absolute favorite work or one that you found over the course of time through kind of your research?
You know, that's a great question. The introduction to the devout life, which I already mentioned earlier, which we don't even print, so I'm not even plugging our company, but that was the first book that I picked up, and his description of how you should do mental prayer in the mornings. I was a medical resident at this time, and I was so inspired by St. Francis de Sales' instructions in that book. I was like, how have I never learned about this? Like, I need to sit down and do some meditation and mental prayer in the mornings and just have that one-on-one conversation, friendly conversation with God. And I would get to the call room early and like lock myself in a call room, and I'm like reading through this book and trying to do it. He actually provides 10 meditations in that book, just basics of the spiritual life for beginners to kind of start with, and I was very inspired by those and constantly revisit those. That's something about good spiritual reading. They're books that you don't want to just read once and then put away, but they're ones that you revisit and may speak to you in a different way the next time you pick it up off the shelf and inspire you, and you kind of go to that next level each time. So Introduction to the Devout Life is probably the one that does that for me.
That's a great one to suggest. I love that book, and it's a book that I keep always going back to. There's always something that I don't catch like my first few reads, and then I read it a little bit slower and realize, oh yeah, this is calling me out.
Yeah, he has a great little section in the first couple chapters there that talk about general confession, of this idea of just like going back through your whole life, if you've kind of made some shoddy confessions in the past, and just sitting down and going through each stage of your life, and then scheduling a time with a priest to kind of do a life confession. And that book inspired me to do that. Graces were flowing from that decision. So was glad that St. Francis de Sales led me to that.
So good. Wow. Well, hey, thank you so much, Brad, for joining us this morning. Now we can find more information about the whole publisher in general, Jesu, and that's CORJESU press.com. Is there anywhere else we can find more about the publisher?
We're on Instagram too, at Jesu Press.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Brian. Let me try that again. Thank you so much, Brad.
Absolutely, Keith. Thanks for having me.